This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by... For over 28 years, Creative Carpet and Flooring has provided not only one of the largest selections of carpet and flooring in the area, but also customer service that exceeds expectations. Featuring leading brands like Mohawk, Stanton, and Shaw, their friendly and knowledgeable staff is there to help you choose the products that are right for you and are available to help answer any questions along the way. Once you become a client, you'll get newsletters recognizing new customers, offering contests, sales, and special thank you incentives for referrals. Creative Carpet and Flooring, with locations in Mokina, Illinois and Highland, Indiana. A family-owned business providing great products and service to families like yours.
The Bill and Kelly Show is recorded at Studio A at Executive Suite Squared in beautiful Hammond, Indiana. Now, here's Bill and Kelly. Well, welcome to our show. Today's guest is kind of on to talk about, as we're going through this really taxing times with the virus outbreak, pandemic, if you will, a lot of situations across the United States we're having to deal with that we never thought we would. So we invited Charles Williams, who is the administrator at Plato Learning, which is a Chicago public school charter school. So Charles, welcome again once to our show. You've been on before, and we enjoy having you on all the time. Every time you're on the show, we always end up having a very enlightening conversation and educational as far as just not leadership, but what you as a educational leader, your perspective on what kids are going through. So what we thought we'd invite you on today to talk to us about, oh my gosh, man, these kids are now, we're now being told that in some areas the school year could be canceled. But even not, if we go according to plan, they're going to be at home for a while. So what we thought to talk to you about is your perspective about what's going on and how it's impacting these kids.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, right? When we first started talking about the closures, right? Most of the students, my own daughters who are in high school, included, were very excited, right? Hey, we get to stay at home, we get to hang out, we get to do all these things. So people are looking at it as a break. But I think that when the reality set in that, first of all, that it's not just going to be a week or two, that this thing may last a whole lot longer, coupled with the idea that you should not be moving around, I think it really starts to hit home with our kids. I think one of the things that we need to remember is that kids, they're social creatures. Nowadays, they are connected through all types of means, and so they need to be engaged. And so I think one of the things that parents should do is to allow their kids to interact with their friends through their various social media accounts. I know my daughter has been on the phone with her best friend almost all day. She wakes up and she's on the phone with her, they're doing homework, they're on the phone together, she pauses, comes and has lunch, goes back, she's on the phone with her. And I think there's that longing for connection, not just with your family and your family at home, but with your friends, the people who you are not going to see for a while. And so that's huge, right? We talk about social emotional learning for students, and this is an aspect that I don't think parents can overlook. Students need to be connected with their peers through some format. I'm not recommending play dates, right? I'm not recommending to go out and hang out with each other, but to definitely interact via social media. And I think the other part that you touched on was students need to be engaged academically in some capacity. Yesterday during lunch we played Trivial Pursuit, and so it's a little way just to learn some little factoids here and there, get your brain running. It was interesting. One of the questions came up, and Sierra's like, "Oh yeah, that's the Spanish-American War. I remember that from class." And so it was just a way to stay engaged. But during this time, what we need to stray away from, and schools are going to have to figure this out, is that it cannot be busy work. There's tons of resources out there. There's tons of organizations out there that are just flooding the market, the educational market, and allowing everything to be free, so that way students have access to things to where you could still do that higher order thinking. You know, my daughter told me the other day, Dad, I thought I would love this. I thought I would love to be at home, kind of work through my stuff on my own, but there's truly something missing, right? The engagement during the English, conversations when they're reading a piece of literature, right? The interactions during Spanish class, things that you're really not going to get online. And so there's a lot that we don't know what's going to happen. But what parents can do is definitely make sure that their kids are engaged in some way. Yes, there's going to be video games and things like that to keep them busy, TV, but they have to be engaged in some way. And so I know there's a lot that I have to talk about, and I don't want to just keep running.
No, that's fine.
But different states are handling this in different ways. In Illinois, we don't have e-learning right now. We're on an statewide emergency shutdown, which means the work that we are providing our students is not mandatory. And that's something hard. You're trying to encourage families to say, hey, this is important so you don't fall behind, but it's not mandatory. Whereas in Indiana, they're going district by district, and so they're on e-learning. And so, now this work counts. And so, questions come up about equity, right? Access and things along those lines. And so, there's just so much. I understand that people are frustrated and confused, but the one thing that I do ask, and I've told my families this, is that this is not a day by day. This is literally an hour by hour. I've had conversations with ISB this week. I have, right after I'm done with this call with you, I have a webinar with CPS. And so we're all trying to figure out how we're going to move forward and how are we going to provide a quality education to our students, when we've been thrust into something that we were not prepared for. So I'll pause for a second just to allow you to navigate in another direction. But yeah, it's convoluted. There's so much going on.
Yeah, it is, and it's scary times. And that kind of leads me in the next question before we delve more into the educational standpoint, is that, these students, and, I got to think back through history, there's been times when things bad have happened during their educational career. But this is something that, when people always say, and I remember a guy that is an author said this, is the things that are quite often unknown tend to be the things that cause people more grief and more anxiety than seeing the actual train coming at you, if you will. I remember listening to someone about horror movies. It's better to scare someone with the monster underneath the bed than the monster that breaks in through the front door. And this is an evolving thing. I mean, these kids are being told that, first of all, okay, they are probably going to be the most resilient. Now, the health officials are coming on and saying the data that they're getting in from Italy does not prove that. In fact, it's contradictory to that, and that the portions of the younger citizenship are being affected. So I just try to put myself in these kiddos' case, and oh my gosh, not having to deal with life before, and this being a lot of their first, difficult time to go through. What do you do to try to calm their nerves? Is there some type of activity that you as an educator can recommend that would put them at ease, or talk they should have?
Yeah, so I think the thing is to listen to them. That I always say this as educators, as parents, we need to be able to listen to our kids, and they have legitimate concerns. Something that I didn't even think about, Annalise is a senior this year. And so she's really upset about the idea of not having a senior banquet, not having a prom, not having a graduation. And these are not things that you get to do again, right? These are a once in a lifetime thing as a senior, and if things progress, she'll be off at IU or Purdue next, in a few months. And you don't get to get those things back. So to sit and actually listen to students, your kids, don't discount what they're going through. But I think the other big thing is that we need to be cognizant, and that's actually the subject of my daily video for today, is we need to assess the credibility of the information that we're sharing. the one thing that we need to understand is that this thing is new, right? And as you said, it's the unknown that scares everybody. I keep hearing, right when this started off, everybody was like, oh, the influenza's worse, we have the flu. But the thing about the flu is we know the flu. It's been around, we've dealt with it, we've battled it. This is something new.
Right.
And, I heard, oh, well, it's not as bad as this outbreak. And then time goes on and the death toll surpasses that one.
Right.
Right. And then it's like, oh, well, not as bad as this thing. Right. But we don't know when this thing is going to be over yet. And so I think the biggest thing for parents is to have honest conversations with their students, with their kids about just the truths behind it and sharing that idea that we don't know. Right. Just the other night, we got a text message from a good friend of ours, that Chicago is, we're going to have that nationwide quarantine implemented in the next 48 hours. And before, I jumped on it, of course, I looked it up. And so this message has been circulating for about a week now. So, if it was at 48 hours, right, like we're well beyond it at this point. But it's everybody's scared, everybody's saying something, and instead of sitting back, instead of researching, instead of looking into it, we're just sharing it, we're just spouting it off, and the reality is nobody knows anything. Right. So I think those two things is to listen to your kids, acknowledge that they have legitimate concerns, legitimate fears, because just like us, this is something new for them. And on the other side, try to share as much information as possible with the caveat of we don't know everything. And we're going through this together, to have those conversations. We do it every day. We sit down and we have breakfast together, so we check in. We do it at lunch, and then of course again at dinner. And so it's important that we are understanding where everybody is at inside this house. And I think that's important for all of our families.
Right. And so I guess to sum up what you said, keep a very good communication ongoing with your children, discuss things as they come up. So even though if it's a difficult topic, don't shy away from it. Discuss
Absolutely.
it, and because and that makes sense because you never know what they're going to see on TV, what they're going to see on social media. You can't guard that, especially with teenagers or in high school. Particularly here in Indiana, they got to be on the internet because, in fact, that's why the Indiana educator could not be in on today that I asked to be on with you, although I think it would have been a great conversation to have. They have e-learning, so he is engaged in administrating that whole process and making sure it goes well. And I guess that's where I guess the kids are engaged with e-learning have less of a difficulty because it's some type of engagement, but yet they are going to have to face the truth when they do get off and find all this information that their friends are Snapchatting them with or sending them a text message and, oh, did you hear about this? We could possibly not be having school for the rest of the year. So as we go on, and can you speak to about what happens? And we're all hearing this, but I guess the plan now, until further notice, is I think a lot of the schools in Indiana are like April 15th. We'll be going back. Mm-hmm. And what is it in Illinois or Chicago? I think you guys are all on the same plan, right? In Illinois.
We are. So Illinois is scheduled to go back the 31st.
The 31st of March. Indiana will be off a little bit further than that, which is kind of interesting. Or I should say most of the schools. And, it's district by district. I think all Northwest Indiana is on the same page because I know the administrators constantly interact and try to collaborate about what each other are doing. And that's good to do because, it's difficult, especially if you teach in another district, maybe in another county. You have to go to another, that's a difficult situation itself. So what I'm getting at, fast forward, what if we shut down for the rest of the year? What are, some of the things, does Illinois have a plan? Are you guys going to, at that point, engage e-learning, or is it a wash for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I know Illinois took this 2 weeks, essentially to prepare themselves because we don't, like I said, nobody knows what's coming. Right. Kansas has decided to close for the rest of the year. And the governor there essentially said, we can't have inconsistencies across the state. We can't have some schools open, some schools closed. We can't have kids being in buildings, because again, right, the whole purpose, what we're trying to do is stop the spread of this thing. So if you have some schools schools are a hotbed of spreading disease. Yeah. Anybody who's ever worked in education will tell you that, right? You got all types of stuff, people touching everything.
The school environment automatically violates the guidance that CDC is stating. We should all keep minimum. They retune that to 10 people, and classrooms. You wish you could have 10 kids per classroom, right?
So from each other.
So unless CDC tunes that requirement up, or I should say, to allow more people, but I don't see that happening. Until they have further definition of how this virus is interacting, I don't see that they can change that. So, boy, what do you do if you now have to be faced with, and this is catastrophic, because parents are now going to have to seek childcare for elementary age kids. They're going to have to see how they're going to keep these preteen or teenagers engaged. And so, boy, what a interesting scenario to deal with. So we end up canceling the year. What does that look like for you as an educator?
So, it's interesting because the only reason why school would be canceled for the year is that, each state has to follow federal mandates. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, right, that I know that Illinois has done, why we've done the 2 weeks of emergency, is that if you provide e-learning, right, the only way e-learning counts is that if you can assure that all students have access. And so, you imagine that in a district, which is extremely difficult, let alone statewide, to say, no, we know that our entire state is going to have access to, e-learning opportunities. That means every student has a device, every student has Wi-Fi, every student will have access to learning, and not just having access, you also have, our diverse learners. If we're providing educational opportunities for students, we need to make sure that our diverse learners are receiving the accommodations and everything that is outlined in their IEPs, which sets yet a whole nother level of how am I going to do speech therapy? How am I going to do, physical therapy? How am I going to do all of these different things that are outlined in their IEPs and 504s, remotely, because we can't see each other. And so I think what a lot of schools, and I think that's where the conversation around closure comes in, is that that's going to be the easier route. If we close, we don't have to worry about those things. Not to say that it's not important, but now we don't have to, worry about these federal mandates. There's conversations with the DOE even about waivers for assessments. Obviously there's state mandated assessments. Right now, Illinois is in the midst of its window for the IAR, which replaced PARC. And so, obviously we can't be taking that test, and if we're closed for a few more weeks, right? So Illinois will be able to apply for a waiver, and I know that is the same for every single state across the country, that they could apply for these waivers to say, well, this assessment isn't going to count. But, the DOE is pushing back to say, that information is still important to have as we roll into next year, because obviously the plan is that we'll have a regular school year next year. Mm-hmm. And so we need that data so that way we know how to provide instruction to our students. And so there's all of these moving pieces, that go into this. It's not just a single decision to say, hey, we're going to reopen, or we're going to be learning, or we're going to close. There's all these little entities that are working behind the scenes, and everybody's scrambling. Like I said, I've been on phone calls, I've been on webinars, I've been on conference calls trying to figure out what's our next step, and are we prepared for that thing? And the truth is, nobody was ready for this, right? We had e-learning for a snow day, right? We're out for a day or two. We had that in place, but nobody was prepared to shut down for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so, it's how do we continue providing, right, that free and appropriate public education to all of our students, regardless of ability, regardless of, accessibility? How do we do that? In most of the states, that's kind of that tipping point. is that we can't. We don't know how. We don't have the resources. So I think that's why those conversations are starting to take place around closure. But then you're right. Then you have this other impact. How are parents being impacted? I know that in CPS, right, which I think it's a response, but to be honest, I don't think it's the right response, right? The park district has upped its offerings. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, that's scary.
Of having, right.
Yeah.
But the reality is a parent says, hey, I'm an hourly employee. If I don't go to work, my employer's not paying me. If I don't get paid, I can't, take care of our bills. And so there's all these other conversations then around what can the federal government do to make sure that households with students who are at home, whether they're receiving some type of, waivers or, will things be put on pause, right? There's conversations around rent and mortgage payments. I know there's this conversation about sending $1,000 to every household, which is great, but depending on your bills, depending on your status, right, $1,000 is not going to go very far.
Right.
And so there's these conversations about not just our students, not just the schools, but now the entire family, right? Because how is that going to be impacted, right? And then you have the employers, and that ripple effect just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, it definitely is going to, I keep on hearing the phrase being used, we are now going to have to live differently. We are going to have to be aware that whatever we come out of this as, we are going to have to think of things differently and look at a society that is going to be drastically changed by this disruption. Again, and it's not over, so we don't know what this causing the disruption is even looking like right now. We don't know how long it's going to last. But I think it's good that we're having all these conversations amongst the entities, the commercial with the education, the private, the public sector. It's forcing us to communicate and better form partnerships across those lines. And probably that's the reason why this is happening. We should have been doing that, and we've all led in our separate islands, public versus commercial, and just sat there, and now we're having to realize, oh my gosh, we can't get by without each other. Commercial funding, possibly for education. And again, they have to be careful because right now their income is heavily being impacted. So it's almost like this interconnected circle that what affects one affects the other. But and again, and that's why we wanted to have you on, is to get that piece of what it looks like from educator. And it's difficult to get any of the commercial entities right now because they're still scrambling. All of a sudden, even when downturns, snow or some weather or economic environment happens, they still have some way of maintaining, but right now they're being told, hey, you got to shut down, like particularly the entertainment industry, you have to shut down your major portion of income. So people are being sent home. Scary times.
No, absolutely. We just had a conversation with ISB, and the big thing that they're encouraging is that all employees continue to get paid, through the schools. And so the questions, start to come up around how's that going to be maintained? Obviously a school is a little bit different. We receive our funding in one large lump sum at the beginning, and so the money's there, so it's not going to go anywhere, and it's not generated by sales like some other industries. But we talk about maintaining that, right? Making sure that our families and people are taken care of, and you're right. Like, I don't know how this is going to look, and we are going to have to live our lives differently. But again, we come back to that unknown of, when we say differently, what does that mean? And are we all going to shift together? Because the last time I checked, my credit card payment came out just as it normally would, right? My mortgage payments due just as it normally is. And so, if we start talking about these shifts, right, of maybe we have to be at home or industries have to shut down, which is going to impact pay, right? Then what does that do for, bills and things along those lines? Like you said, it's all connected, and we all have to be at the table. We all have to be having these conversations and understanding that, it impacts all of us.
Yeah, particularly in your state, because your state has financial issues to begin with. It doesn't have the resources like Indiana has right now. But I don't want to get in a political debate, but it truly doesn't. I mean, Illinois is in kind of a precarious situation because they don't have a fund that they can tell the schools, here's some more money as an emergency funding measure. They probably could amount, but I venture to say, because of what we've been reading in newspapers, that can't be a large amount. So it's interesting times. Boy, oh boy. I guess, and I do want to close this up real quick because I do want to get this up on and stream across our platforms, because this can be useful information, and for someone that's out there sitting at home and saying, oh my gosh, what should we do? And we do have quite a few listeners in Chicago, so this could definitely be helpful for maybe some of your parents. Any other words of knowledge that you have to add to this conversation? As we continue on, as far as model of education, things that, what if it lasts beyond? Let's look at it this way. And I don't want to suggest this by any means, but what if we can't get this virus under control and we are looking at the entire year? The actual calendar year, not just the school year, that they say, we can't slow this thing down. Are we looking at an environment that may be approaching homeschooling, and providing resources to parents? But boy, what is that going to look like? I mean, now let me ask you, the Plato, do they have one-to-one? Are you guys prepared with one-to-one?
Yeah, so fortunately we are, and it just happened this year through a grant. I was able to make sure. So we have a device for each of our kids, but we were starting to ramp up. When I started seeing and hearing this thing, I started putting things into place. Letting our parents know about our e-learning platforms and things along those lines. But the reality is, it hit us even faster than we expected. So last week, Friday, I was on a conference call at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we were talking about how should we move forward, how do we navigate this thing, because at that point CPS was still saying we are not going to close. Friday at around noon, right, a decision had been made, we're closing.
Right.
And so, all of a sudden now we're scrambling, and, the idea of we didn't have a process in place to say, hey, you can take these devices home with you. We were building those things. And so I can only imagine places that weren't prepared, at all. But the reality is, right, colleges do this, right? Anybody who takes college courses now, most of it is done online. Like, you have to want to be in a classroom, if you want to. But most of it, my entire second master's was done online. So it's very possible, but the difference is that we are in a much different place maturity-wise. We're in a much different place, educational-wise. And so when you're talking about building on those foundational aspects, I think, our high schoolers, I think they should do okay. Some of our middle schoolers, just depending on the supports that they have at home, and the level of their maturity, I think that they would do okay. But I struggle with this concept of littles, right? Our little people, our pre-K, our kindergarten, our first grade, getting all of their learning, online. And again, it's not impossible, right? It's just having to rethink this whole approach. And I guarantee you that the educational giants out there are doing exactly this. They're scrambling to figure out ways to make e-learning accessible to everybody. Like I said, my kids love a program called Epic. It's an online platform where kids can read books, and at home they have to pay for it, but Epic just released it absolutely free. There's a lot of those programs that are just saying, here, have access to these things. And so now school districts, and I think states, they're going to have to figure out a hub to do this. We utilize Google Classroom. Lake Central utilizes Canvas, but it really is, how are we going to make sure, and what are we doing, right? That's the big thing, is what are we doing now? God forbid if we say we can't go back in August and September, what are we doing now to make sure that we're okay when that decision comes down the line? Because we can't sit and wait. I think that's what we're realizing very quickly is that this thing is progressing so fast. As I said, it's hour to hour. Mm-hmm. So every day that we sit around and say, well, let's just wait and see what happens, it's getting progressively worse, and it doesn't seem to be getting better. So how do we put things into place now so that way we are truly prepared if that announcement comes down the line? I think that needs to be our focus right now, is how do we start making that different world that we're talking about? What does that look like, and how are we prepared for it?
Right. You know, just on a little offshoot here, you know, one of the things that, and I know you as a resident of Indiana know this, we've, for years, in my generation, it used to be pushing for kindergarten, making sure that we had access to public kindergarten. Now there was, you know, preschool. The data clearly showed kids that went to preschool, that got early foundation set in preschool, had much better of a chance. And, you know, we saw those test scores go up that proved that. You know, what I grieve about is now what's going to happen with that, our plans for actually making pre-K a part of the school system. Do you think that's going to get set back, or are we going to try to maintain that somehow? And the whole idea that these pre-K school kids need to be in an environment that is just as structured as the current school system is now.
Yeah, you know, it's a curiosity, right? I have no idea which way it's going to go. I mean, obviously there is this desire, right? Everybody understands this, right? The earlier you have access to a formal structured education, the better that you're going to be down the road. But the reality is, can an online platform provide that with individuals that are so young? You know, I mean, you're talking about having a situation where it's not independent, right? My daughters right now, they're in their bedrooms knocking out assignments. I check on them, I make sure that it's done, right? But I don't have to sit with them and go through the learning with them, right? With a pre-K student, you have to. And so then are you going to have somebody at home who has the capacity to do that? Whether it's, you know, I'm available to be at work, I mean, to be at home and not have to be in an office somewhere. You know, do I have the capacity to teach my child? Because, you know, teaching is not for everybody. Right. And so, you know, again, it becomes another conversation of, do we push this thing, you know, to make sure that everybody has access to it and God knows what it's going to look like? Or do we, you know, put it on pause and deal with the ramifications of that, understanding that we may shift a little bit? But, you know, what happens a lot right now, and I'm huge on Twitter, I talk all over Twitter with individuals, we have all these chats, and one of the big conversations that stems from this is just reevaluating the importance of education, right? We keep talking about we need test scores, we need this data, and, you know, but right now we're willing to put everything on pause. So is that really what's most important? Or when we keep talking about this different world, are we going to see a shift away from such a stressor on, you know, assessments and data and standardized testing, and instead an acquisition of skills? Because again, we don't even know what the world beyond the school is going to look like. So, right, what are we now preparing our students for? What type of world? You know, and I don't mean to sound morbid, I don't mean to sound apocalyptic or whatever, but it's, right, the world is shifting rapidly. And so what is going to be important for students? What skills are going to be important for them to know, as opposed to just acquisition of knowledge, you know, so I can show mastery on some assessment.
Yeah, and that's, I hear every educator talking about, and so behind that concept is we have to get away from teaching for the test and teaching towards the skills, what these kids need, as opposed to a global, what do they need? Do they make this mark? Because, you know, when I was at Valpo, I saw that it just was so disheartening. An immense amount of resources were being spent on and grinned by the teacher to get them ready for a test, because they were being held accountable. The students were going to be held accountable. The school all the way down the line. That concept, you know, it's going to be interesting to see if we still hold to that concept after whatever this happens. But yeah, it's something we have to keep a look at, because, you know, here we were supposed to be one of the most developed nations in the world, and trying to keep a standard above all other nations. And, you know, we've seen that the Asian countries eclipsed us in math and science. Yeah, if we want to remain competitive. And again, when I look back in all catastrophic events that I can remember in my lifetime, almost 60 years here, Charles, going to be in just a couple of weeks. Oh boy, the Vietnam War, the assassination of Kennedy, things that stop our society. Boy, this seems to be, at least in my opinion, and we're not far into it, to be one of the most catastrophic socially and economically that I have ever known in my lifetime. And I've been through a lot, tornadoes, blizzards, so it's going to be interesting to see what we as a society come out at the end of this. And historically, if we all listen and honor history, whatever it should be, and you smile, it should be better. For whatever reason, we hope that we will reconfigure things so we are more resilient towards the future that we have ahead as a human society. So, boy, I tell you, we probably better start wrapping up here. Is there anything before we close out you want to share with our listening audience?
The one thing that I keep closing out, every video that I'm doing now, my emails, everything, is, just simply this: be smart, be safe. That's it. Don't necessarily buy into all the hype. Be smart about the things that you're doing, right? Keep your distance. Don't go wandering around and doing things that you don't need to do. Mm-hmm. And in the end of that, just be safe, right? Even if you do not care, if you don't think that this is going to impact you, if you think that you're immune, right? Consider everybody else. And that's the one thing that kept aggravating me more than anything else, was that people were being extremely selfish. Saying, well, I'm young, I'm it's not going to impact me, but you're going to interact with somebody who it may impact, and they may interact with someone, and so on. So
right.
Be smart about the things you're doing, and be safe, if not for yourself, for everybody else that's out there.
And perhaps this is what it was intended. But if you believe in the world as a big physics ball, any interaction will have an impact on all of us. If you believe in that concept, then, probably this was meant to drive home, hey, we can't continue working blind. We have to understand what our actions cause on others. Understand that, yeah, we're going to be fine. Oh, yeah, I work out all the day. I'll be fine. But if I happen to meet up with someone that's 60 or above that may have underlying health issues, I may be causing an immense amount of damage that wasn't intentional, but I got to be knowledgeable about those things. And probably that's what this is calling us to do, being more knowledgeable about our actions.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion. Maybe, it caused a lot of, and right now, guess what? We have plenty of time to think about this. Charles, listen, I tell you what, I hope there comes a day that this is all beside us and you and I can sit down and have a beer and discuss what happened and hope that we'll be we come out of this even stronger than before. So listen, Charles, we really appreciate you. I appreciate your parking lot chats that you give periodically out of your car. Those are very, very informative and entertaining, so keep those up. I appreciate it. And so why don't we tell folks how they can follow you, because you do really have put some thought-provoking things out there.
Sure. So I think the best way to follow me is through the consulting aspect, the CW Consulting. So you can find me on Twitter @_CW Consulting, same hashtag for Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, or even just go to the website, www.cwconsultingservice.com. Those are all ways, and if you follow me on Twitter, I'm going to follow you back, and whether it's part of a group chat or whether it's a direct message, you can do that. And I'm also recently on Voxer. Still trying to figure that thing out. But it's this username.
Hold it, millennial or whatever you want. Hold it. I'm a baby boomer. I'm still trying to figure out Snapchat. I thought Snapchat is where a group of teens just got around and started talking until someone said, no, boomer, it's an app. So Voxer, is this a new one?
I thought it was new, but apparently it's been around for a while.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it allows you to leave voicemails for people So that way, if I wanted to call you and send a message instead of trying to put it through a text and, God knows how that's going to be interpreted, I could drop you a line, quick message, and then whenever you get a chance, you could listen to it and you could hit me back. And if I happen to be on the app at the same time, then we could actually engage in a conversation. But it's pretty cool. And so like Twitter, it's essentially Twitter with voice.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
I like that. I'll tell you why. Because I'm not sure about you. So much miscommunication has come through written communication and texting because you don't hear the deflection in the voice. Well, I'm all for that one. I guess I could understand that one, being a boomer.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Charles. You could say, okay, boomer. Go ahead, give it to me. As always, Charles, this has been very enlightening, and you've always been very informative. Keep up the great work that you're doing, boy, we look forward to having you on the show again.
All right, Bill. I look forward to seeing you. Tell Callie I said hello.
Definitely, and she's sorry she couldn't be here today, but she had some things she had to take care of at home, so... With that, we'll say goodbye for now. Folks, stay safe out there. It is a scary world, but we will all get through this together. And just remember that. Together, we will make it beyond this. With that, we'll say goodbye for now.
This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by... For over 28 years, Creative Carpet and Flooring has provided not only one of the largest selections of carpet and flooring in the area, but also customer service that exceeds expectations. Featuring leading brands like Mohawk, Stanton, and Shaw, their friendly and knowledgeable staff is there to help you choose the products that are right for you and are available to help answer any questions along the way. Once you become a client, you'll get newsletters recognizing new customers, offering contests, sales, and special thank you incentives for referrals. Creative Carpet and Flooring, with locations in Mokina, Illinois and Highland, Indiana. A family-owned business providing great products and service to families like yours.